Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. So I'm Al Lindseth. I'm former Plains All-American Chief Risk Officer, CIO, and CISO, and then I've been running my own advisory for a number of years. Uh, as part of that, I have a advisory for operators, people like yourselves who had the jobs that I had, and then also tech companies as well. And what I'm really doing there with tech companies, just to let you know, I had hosted a dinner, collaboration dinner for OLOID back in May. And a lot of what I'm doing there is, in terms of the companies that I showcase to my network, is I'm on a bit of a soapbox about innovation. I feel like, especially in Houston, but in Texas, we're lagging the market a little bit in innovation. It's often viewed with skepticism, a little speculative. It might be something that you might not get the return for. And I tend to view innovation a little differently. I think it's something that's sorely needed. The attackers are innovating, a subset of your competition is innovating, and will disrupt a lot of you if you don't. And so I tend to look at where, if we project forward a couple of years, whether it's threats, data growth, where are we going to end up? And what are the processes? What are companies doing that's not sustainable given that path? And then I focus in on those areas and look for tech enablers. But it's not just about the tech, it's about the non-tech as well, and how you enable a lot of this. And those are the companies that I put in front of my network around the dinners. And then oftentimes people will miss those. And so we'll have these virtual sessions to kind of allow them to see what we talked about in the dinner. It's not the 3 hour discussion that we have there, but it is, it allows us to kind of showcase the innovation, which I think is really important before you even start architecting, because a lot of people they don't fully appreciate the explosion that we've had in innovation over the last 5 years and how much better things are now, how you can solve a lot of problems you could never solve before in a different, more effective way. So I think that's important to kind of show groups as they deal with these pain points. And last spring, I was really looking a lot at identity and access management. I've had 30 of these dinners over the last 3.5 years. I had a dinner focused on agentic AI around IAM in February, and then I had this one in May with these guys, really focused on frontline deskless workers, a huge subset of the IAM population, if you will, that really isn't being addressed effectively. And so, uh, in terms of why I was looking at IAM, I've seen over the last 3 years of working with different tech firms, working with my network on what's needed, that it was really getting in the way. Challenges, IAM challenges were slowing up modernization, improving security, a lot of different reasons. It impacts every group, touches all the users. You got different rules and regulations, different systems. It's just very complex, identity juggling, different logons. And so I wanted to focus on that last spring. So Mohit, if you'll advance slide for me there. So to what we're talking about today, let me take a couple minutes to frame up the problem here, and then I'll hand it over to these guys. So, and we're going to go ahead and, if you would, kind of hold questions, put them in the chat. If you've got a burning question, you got to leave early, we'll take that. Just let us know. But we want to make certain we get all the way through the demo. So if you could hold questions till the end, that'd be great. And we've got everybody on mute right now except for the speakers. But we'll make certain to leave enough time for discussion and Q&A. So what you see out there is you see a lot of big rollouts, enterprise system, increasing apps that are touching this frontline deskless segment, right? And then you've also got expansion to the edge, right? Increase in smart devices, automation, OT, IT convergence. And that has really increased the digitalization around the frontline worker, deskless worker. And you see a lot of projects where there's a huge investment, maybe HRIS rollout or Maximo or asset management, where that group doesn't really get considered, and it can really suboptimize the investment. And now that there's such a focus on getting the operating data, whether it's to use with AI or analytics, or, because you have such a large group, whether it's your employees or contractors or vendors, like with a refinery turnaround that takes place, and efficiency and urgency is so paramount that this is having a big impact. Mohit, if you'll jump to the next one. So this group is getting rapidly digitized. And if you think about what's happened with knowledge industries over here on the left side, you had expansion and increased digitalization there as well, all the way from early SaaS in the 2000s to expansion of that across all different functions to now AI powered SaaS. But you had cloud IAM applications, like Okta and others, that really came in and have enabled that whole process. But if you look at the deskless frontline workers, you really haven't seen that. You've seen the increased digitalization, but you haven't seen the IAM solutions come into that like in the other area. Mohit, if you'll grab that. So they're really a decade behind for the most part, where we are on knowledge workers. And that subset, the deskless workforce, has very unique requirements, right? They versus traditional office environments and the knowledge workers. They use shared devices a lot of time, and they can't have safe credentials or MFAs. Very limited there. They'll log in and out and have multiple devices, up to 10 or so in some cases. If you take one worker and they're taking 45 seconds to log in and they've got 10 devices, that's 60 hours a year, which may not seem like a big deal, but multiply that by 1,000, which is pretty consistent for a lot of these types of organizations. They're wearing gloves, they're speaking multiple languages. The one thing that's consistent across all of them is that they can't afford access delays. They have a lot of urgency in their jobs, and there's a huge impact of that. And legacy passwords and badges and VPNs for contractors or remote access just aren't cutting it, right? And when you look at IAM solutions, the existing ones, the names really are very inconvenient for all deskless needs. Mobile-based, FIDO-based, are unsuitable for shared devices. If you take a refinery, you can't bring a phone in a refinery. It might create a spark. Hardware-based solutions are very expensive for large churn organizations. A lot of these, like if you think about a refinery again, you're going to have turnarounds. You bring in a lot of contractors. Takes a lot of work in a short amount of time. Other types of industries that fit this description have a lot of seasonal workers. So there's a lot of churn. Mohit, if you'll advance that. So what's happening is companies are being forced in one direction or the other to make these hard choices, right? If they veer towards usability, then they might leave security holes open. If they veer towards security and really lock it all down, they can risk a lot of user frustration and loss of productivity. Go ahead if you'll advance to the next one. And so I'm a former risk officer, so obviously a big focus on and appreciation for security. And this right now, I think, is max exposure in this area, especially as I learned more about it, because it's not being appreciated. And so you have a lot of efforts in increased digitalization and not enough focus and awareness around the limitations when it comes to the deskless worker. For example, 70% of them still use shared passwords or pins. So this leaves them open to serious risks, and it could be a compliance perspective, and we've got some data points here. That can be pretty costly, average $250,000 a day, or, a couple of different cases, one with a $3 million penalty. Security risks, I was at a forum this morning where actually I think we're at $10.2 million per breach. But Verizon's annual data breach report said 35% of all data breaches are from frontline sectors. And then, like I said, for the companies that veer more towards security, you end up with lower productivity and higher IT costs. This example, I think, just used passwords in a higher churn business and ended up with 5.2 million a year productivity loss, another $1 million of IT costs, spending time on those activities. And then you've got a lot of the tough to quantify issues as well, sub-optimized projects and investments and enterprise app rollouts, user frustration, apathy, lack of training, data issues because you don't have as much utilization at the edge, on the field floor, on the plant floor, in the field, and so that can really have a lot of impacts that are very tough to quantify. Mohit, if you'll advance that. It's not only a risk thing, though. It's not only downside hazard. It's also a big missed opportunity, I think. So deskless employees are twice the knowledge workforce that of the knowledge, twice the amount of employees of the knowledge workforce. So globally, 1.8 billion to 1 billion. And on the knowledge workforce side, you've seen companies like Okta and Ping and Duo create a $19 billion market, right? But we haven't really had scalable IAM players over on the deskless workforce side. And if you, the little numbers there, the US, there's a slightly smaller margin, but I don't think that's the case in Houston. I think that we have a lot of entities and a lot of growth in Houston in manufacturing and logistics. You look at the big distribution centers, doctors, healthcare. And so I think it's a little more representative of the global numbers. And we've seen a ton of reindustrialization, and that's something that isn't going to stop. It's just the environment is really well suited to it, low energy prices, business friendly environment, low taxes. There's just a number of reasons why we're seeing growth in those areas here in Houston and in Texas for the most part. Mohit, if you'll flip it one more. So this just really creates a perfect situation for a deskless focus IAM framework, which is what OLOID does. And just to break it down a little bit, we've got higher authentication needs, and that can be due to these big enterprise rollouts, be due to shifts changing. Doctors hate lags due to passwords. Some of the larger players like Microsoft, they see the need here, but they're kind of stumbling and not fully addressing this, or higher data security risk. Just some data points there. 70% of frontline industry breaches involve passwords. 1 in 5 deskless enterprises have open shared devices with no login, and 50% of CISOs found sticky notes with passwords on shared devices, or high compliance needs. And we all see MFA rising to the top of the list and becoming a requirement, and the penalties getting more and more severe. So it really just creates a situation where I think forward-leaning organizations need to rethink their IAM, need to rethink their ecosystem, and see if this is creating a big pain point, because a lot of them just aren't looking at it right now as seriously as they should be. And so with that, I'm gonna introduce Mohit Garg is the co-founder and CEO of OLOID. Madhu is the CTO. They're going to do a little poll here just so we kind of see who's here, and can tailor this a little bit to you guys' needs. And then I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Really appreciate it. And folks, hopefully you're seeing a poll, and we are going to share some data here. Hopefully it stimulates an interesting discussion. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond to the poll. So I let the team share data, and we'll take a pause once the results, we're still collecting them. But good to meet you all. Very good afternoon, good evening, depending on time zone and where you're located. But pleasure to have you all here. Al, thanks for setting it up. The objective of our webinar today is to not just set up the problem context, which Al did a really good job with, but also talk about how our customers across different verticals, manufacturing, energy, utilities, pharma, healthcare, they have a common set of problems, and we have taken that to heart and built a product that we want to walk you through. It is called OLOID, which is an abbreviation for online linked offline identity, which kind of sets the context of how the persona of users that we're going to be talking about operates in a very different world. They're not entirely offline, but offline from a traditional IT perspective, offline from managed devices, MDM on the smartphone. That's a very different environment that we operate in. So I want to lead in by talking about the future shared vision that our customers have brought to us at OLOID, which is to have a unified pane of glass from an identity standpoint, a consistent authentication across the day of the life of a frontline worker, and ensuring that we're meeting both of the objectives that Al talked about, making it frictionless, making it user-friendly, but make it also secure at the same time. Now, that's a great vision, and it's about working your way through a maturity continuum. So we believe uh, an organization which has invested in the right use cases from their business processes will cover everything from onboarding, making sure the capture of the user identity data is frictionless and secure at the time of joining or pre-joining, ensuring that physical access into the facilities is secure in coordination with the physical access control system, badge management systems. The HR tech data from a time clock perspective is integrated. And then the traditional passwordless authentication that we're going to talk about, which is logging into PCs, logging into devices, logging into SSO-enabled applications, as legacy applications in some cases, ensuring there is a step up or two-factor or multi-factor compliance as the use case and criticality of the applications require. And also how this data is purged and offboarding ensures the access is terminated, right? With shared passwords, we'll talk about how departed employees might know the shared credential, which presents a risk. So with that, just brief about OLOID as a company. We're a technology company headquartered in Sunnyvale, California. We've had the privilege of working with many large employers of frontline workforce. Everything ranging from factories for Honeywell, Kraft Heinz, Tyson Foods, to facilities in mining, Blue Mountain Minerals, to airports like DFW, food manufacturing, energy companies like GE Vernova. And across the board, the authentication pain points have a common theme. It's about the friction of traditional passwords, the need for us to have longer, more secure passwords, and how that completely goes into the opposite direction of what a frontline worker needs, right? They could be on small little tablets where typing itself, one single character on a tiny keyboard is really hard. And combine that with regulations in many cases need for higher security. CGIS, CISA has a mandate where they've talked about every federal supplier is subject to MFA. And as we are going through this, feel free to look at the poll results. We are already talking about almost all, like we talked about 70%, but today in our attendees, it's 100% individual password, right? It's shared logins in 50% cases, forgotten passwords and time-consuming logins appears to be a major challenge. And when you think about shared device and mobile devices, we'll cover all of these themes. These are going to be the primary devices where these applications and access is being consumed. So moving along, the way OLOID looked at this problem, we said, we worked with the existing authentication and SSO systems that you've invested in. So you work through standards-based OIDC, SAML, and passkey-based integration, but put a layer of the last inch of authentication, which is based on physical identity for the quote-unquote offline world, as opposed to the digital identity, which is password-based. So we offer ways of authenticating using who you are and what you carry. So face biometrics is an example of who you are. What you carry example would be a RFID badge that you're using yourself to time clock or letting yourself through a turnstile or door. The advantage is you still get the access to all the Zebra devices, handle devices, PCs, and applications that you need in the workplace, but then you don't need to recall long passwords, no typing required, does not require one-to-one device mapping for shared devices, which we talked about how important that is. And we can't assume that this user is going to have a unique, dedicated work email address or even a phone number that is accessible. They may carry a personal device, everybody carries a personal phone, but unionized labor may not even have the ability to have a work application on their personal device because the unions may not allow it. They may use it as negotiation. So just combine that with the risks of password from a phishing standpoint. The solution covers all of these challenges that I'll talked about. And the idea is not to create a completely different identity stack. Most of our customers, they already have invested into SSO stack for their knowledge workers. It complements that with a fully integrated federated identity, which is passwordless, built for shared devices around these constructs of who you are, what you carry, and integration with the time clocks, OT systems, Zebra devices, kiosks, and PCs that are very different from the knowledge worker applications, which could be like SharePoint, Salesforce, which make no sense for a deskless worker. They are going to be accessing devices on the shop floor in distribution centers, in clinics and hospitals. The end state is going from where you have this neatly integrated knowledge worker identity, but a siloed frontline worker identity. Siloed in terms of one version of the truth exists in physical access control system. So the worker has RFID badge, which is in the PAC system, physical access control system like a Honeywell, Genetec, or Lenel. There is a separate identity in time clock. So Workday, UKG, they might have fingerprint or badge-based identity. And then work applications could be ERP, could be service ticketing or a pharma application or OT systems, which now again are completely siloed. So we believe in taking these 96 different apps that we found in frontline applications, authentication opportunities, which are not managed by an existing IDP, and bringing that into a unified identity framework where using passkeys, using OIDC SAML, using password managers, where it's a legacy application where you can introduce some of the modern methods, and working in coordination with the existing SSO, bringing all of these 96 different authentication opportunities into a full identity orchestration. Now, this is not a new identity stack. It's about working with that green box which says existing SSO and orchestrating across these different day of the life authentication events for the frontline worker. In terms of platforms that it supports, everything from working in coordination with the existing SSO and MFA framework. We talked about how kiosks are typically Windows PCs. They might have the form factor which looks like a kiosk, but underneath it's a Windows PC. It's a shared device. And handheld devices, very common to factory floors, distribution centers, retail, energy, mining, where you're going to see Android phones, Zebra devices, you're going to see tablets, and lots of standalone browser-based apps. In some cases, local Windows applications, which were created 15 years ago, 25 years ago, but need to be supported. So the framework supports this whole variety of platforms. An example of how we have implemented this at scale would be in the food production, food manufacturing, food distribution area that we are showcasing here with Tyson Foods. As you know, Fortune 100 leading global food company with 80 plus different locations ranging from distribution to food processing and 100,000 plus frontline workers. They fit all of the profile that Al shared about using gloves for safety, food contamination reasons. Workers have different language abilities and consistently not your typical tech-savvy knowledge worker. So as a result, when you combine that with a long password requirement, potentially with like an Okta login on a kiosk. Now, the critical employee applications ranging from applying for leave, shift schedules, applying for job rotation, different types of vacation balance type of needs, Tyson Foods were experiencing a very low adoption of these workplace kiosk applications. Also, long delays in logging in because users were getting stuck. Their password expired. They call IT support, trying to reset the password, lost productivity. And overall, it's a poor employee experience when the organization is invested in so much of employee support applications, providing them real-time information around their payroll and training. If you're preventing them from accessing it easily, that's a lost opportunity for the investment. OLOID invested into partnering with both their existing SSO integration and also their standalone kiosk and workstation and tablets using face and also the RFID card as an option. So you have both biometric and non-biometric options. This did away with passwords entirely. So we're talking about usernameless and passwordless authentication, where the users are able to identify, authenticate themselves with these factors. As a result, the same applications, once integrated with OLOID, everything else in the backend remains the same. Tyson Foods was able to realize much higher application access, completion rates in training, much lower IT support costs. We'll talk about that a little bit and quantify it. But because you don't have passwords, you don't now have to deal with people forgetting passwords being reset constantly, and in general, much higher employee morale because now they have access to workplace applications, self-service them. They don't have to wait for critical actions they need to take. Putting it to numbers, now this is obviously on a much larger scale, 100,000 employee organization, but you also have to recognize many of the costs at the scale have huge economies of scale. So we're talking about employee productivity gains, we're talking about support savings. Now, support savings here, we've calculated at $10 per ticket. We have seen smaller organizations, this cost to be as high as $70 per ticket. So we're talking about a combination of reducing the number of tickets, in addition, also creating these extra hours which were earlier being wasted due to access issues, friction in the login process. So we're talking about 360,000 hours per year saved, which means $8 million of productivity gains. Over a period of 3 years, that's estimated 23 million of savings from just those two factors alone. And this doesn't include some of the intangibles of employee morale and improved employer branding. So with that, I will hand over to my co-founder CTO Madhu, who will take us through the technology behind the scenes based on the slide that I shared. So over to you, Madhu.
Thanks, Mohit. I'm assuming you guys can see my screen. Great, yeah. So we'll go over quick demos of our products. Like Mohit said, we support a lot of different form factors, operating systems, and scenarios. So may not be able to cover the whole thing, but I'll try to cover the top ones that most of our customers use. So the form factors, the most popular ones are an existing RFID badge. In case that is not available, end user would or customer would choose an inexpensive NFC sticker. Or those who are open to doing biometrics would use their face, which requires no specialized hardware a regular webcam would do. So if you have Windows PCs that are shared, you could install our software, which acts as a credential provider in Windows World. And this, what it does is an end user would come in, use their existing badge that you use to access buildings and tap the badge. You can set up to ask for a PIN as a second factor, which can be adaptive, and the end user will log in. Not only that, they would log in as an individual credential, but we can also authenticate them as a shared account, and we can still give you as an employer auditability of that, hey, it is really Ali who logged in as a floor supervisor account, right? So which is an information you currently won't have when you're using shared credentials, right? So it's a pretty straightforward, easy user experience for end users. Now the same user experience, but it can be now the factor is face if you don't have RFID badges. It's as good as taking a straightforward selfie and then authenticating them into Windows. It's as simple as that. It only uses a 2D picture and 2D camera, but it performs things like liveness check, which is iBeta level 2 and 3 certified, essentially preventing any sort of presentation attacks or spoof attempts, right? So But post-launch of those, post-authentication, we can even authenticate them into all of their Windows application, which could be tied to an SSO like Okta or Ping or Entra ID, or it could be a legacy application where we would auto-authenticate them. The same sort of scenarios apply at the web as well, where we can work with your existing SSO system, and the end user can click a button to log in with Face, which can start from any place, whether from Okta or your own custom login page. And once they authenticate, we will automatically authenticate them to their existing SSO system, which could be Okta in this case, could be Ping or an Entra ID. Similar experience for badge as well. They would scan their badge and they would authenticate directly into those systems. If you want to just focus on a particular application, in this case, we're going to be focusing on Workday, and we can easily directly take them to their existing Workday accounts. Typically, one of the biggest complaints we've seen is that, okay, end users cannot access their paycheck today because there's no easy way to authenticate because they don't have an email address or phone number, right? So this is one of the things that we are seeing where employers are giving them flexibility to authenticate into Workday even from home because it requires only a 2D camera, which should be available in pretty much everybody's phone to authenticate and then, check their own paychecks, right? So you could also use OLOID as an MFA factor to your existing SSO systems. If you think about your current MFA factors that you want to enforce, typically involves an authenticator app. It could involve an email address or a phone number to have an OTP, right? With OLOID, you basically remove that as an requirement. The end users can still authenticate using a username password as a first time, but you can now get a device-less MFA, which is where they don't need to rely on an email or a phone number to do the MFA, and they can continue using one of the factors that we support that could be a face badge or an NFC tag, and then we can then authenticate them into their SSO systems, right? If you're also interested in extending that journey to time and attendance or HR picture verification, which I'll talk in a little bit, you can use that where the authentication happens really quickly on a tablet mounted on a wall, and it could be used to send the data to their time and attendance systems like Kronos or Workday or ADP. And if for legacy apps where you don't have any sort of passwords, you cannot really integrate them with Entra ID or Okta or Ping, we can use our Chrome Vault extension, which acts as a password manager that autofills those credentials into those legacy apps and authenticates them. Beyond that, if you're using things like Zebra devices, again, same experience in the Zebra device where we become the login screen for the Zebra device, works with MDM managed device, without MDM managed device, different deployment models there, but the end result is the same for the end user where they can get to authenticate using their face, automatically authenticate into all of their applications. So they're just logging in once with their face or badge or NFC and they're done. A lot of the Zebra device also has NFC antenna in them. So NFC is a great form factor to use, whether it comes in different ways. There's a sticker or a band, authenticate them, ask for a second factor like PIN, and then log them into all of their applications without repeated logins, right? For really legacy application, we could have a green screen application. You could have really old application where we have RPA flows where we complete it. So pretty much any sort of unique scenario that you have in your organization, we have seen it all with working with our large Fortune 500 companies, and we have built a solution that is catered to that. So before I jump into the platform, I'll pause here and take any questions that you guys might have. One of the advantage of the solution that we've developed is that we worked on a more modern architecture that relies on a pub sub methodology, which what essentially what it means is you can now have the benefit of having an on-prem deployment, but also have the benefit of cloud. It's kind of an hybrid system. I'll explain how that works. So let me quickly switch to my platform here. So if you have utilities where there are small locations across the board, similar to we have healthcare companies who have small clinics across the board, you will be deploying our software into those devices, or it's a web-based and you'll be deploying on the web. But the software, first of all, is fully synced to the cloud, or if you don't have cloud connectivity, there are on-prem capabilities where we can provide those architecture. But more importantly, every single thing is designed to work fully offline. So if you lose internet, if you don't have internet, completely air gapped, all of the system will continue to work. It won't just get the new data until it gets some connectivity to internet. And the end users can just simply authenticate. If they're going from one site to another, they will find no difference. And all the policies can be set in our portal. And you as an administrator can manage all of this at a global level by looking at all of the endpoint and pushing specific policies into those endpoint, right? So for example, for every use case, you can create an application at our end. In this case, Windows login, you can create what sort of authenticators you are interested in. And it doesn't have to be one size fits all. For certain scenarios, you would prefer one type of authentication, which is another, you might want a badge, or some could be face, or it could be different types of devices. You may want different use cases, user experience, or it could be different user types, right? But you get to set all that in our end, fully customizable on how it should behave in terms of look and feel and everything else, right? And you can have one or more identity providers, or you could have no identity providers. We can support that. You can fully configure that. You can sequence how each interaction should feel like. Okay, what is the first thing we want to ask them, and what is after that, what do we ask them for second? Or we don't want to do any factors sequencing. We want to ask for PIN once a day, but then don't ask for it for the rest of the day, right? Overall, all of where I'm coming from is all of these are all managed in the cloud and can be pushed to these edge devices if they have some internet connectivity, or if they have any on-prem internet connectivity, that's fine. You can be pushed through your on-prem servers through these edge devices. So it actually acts as an advantage. If you have smaller devices, then you don't have to really maintain heavy infrastructure to support them. You can have one centralized place where you're able to manage everything. Does that answer your question before I continue with the demo?
It does. Could that centralized place be self-hosted in our own cloud?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Madhu and Courtney, I'll bring this up too. We got into a little bit of a discussion around this exact point at the dinner that was very helpful. A couple things I remember coming out of that. One that was really interesting was just the value of this data back to a lot of the operations personnel. Some of that they were talking about plants or facilities just because they don't have that right now because you have the shared password, shared devices. A lot they don't have as much visibility, but that actually expanded into a discussion. Like I came from planes around the trucking organization with some of the employees that came from there, and also with some of the other midstream, because you're dealing with a lot of breadth in midstream, whether it's pipeline or all the different sensors that aren't necessarily going through the controller that you're using for different reasons, or the trucking organizations. And so I just wanted to kind of add that from a little bit more of a business context.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Also, a lot of this information today, because they use post-it notes or uh, outright open devices, you really don't know who's working on what. And, many times it's not even nefarious. They're just trying to do their job, and, they're just, using somebody else's profile, and they're just adding data to that and things like that. So things are not as clear in the current scenario, but once you make an authentication mechanism that is easy to identify who they are themselves, it kind of opens up a whole slew of opportunities there. Yeah.
Yeah, like the trucking discussion expanded into like the yards and the yard management and the different things that you could do. in terms of not only being able to control that access a lot better or leverage existing devices, like these guys can leverage badges or other, devices that you're already using out there. But then the visibility into what's happening in those places. And I thought, because I think in terms of like we had plants and straddle plants and gas storage and centralized places, but we also had a lot of breadth at Plains where you've got a lot of expansion around, pipeline. In a lot of cases, that's a breadth issue. Trucking is a breadth issue. Not as much process control, like you have in that plant or that facility.
Absolutely. And like you said, it is really so much variance for trucking and plants. There's different types of users. Some are contractors, some are employees, some are temp workers. And not everybody is the same. Not everybody has the same level of access, same experience, same end devices they would touch, right? So that is where we are really we've seen that with a lot of our Fortune 500 companies and customers. So we've built a platform that allows you that flexibility to separate them out. In this example, what I'm showing, where basically like you can have different connections. It could be based on the type of workers. It could be based on locations, regions, type of facilities, whatever you could think of. You could separate them out and write policies for just those type of users, right? So that gives you one centralized place where you're able to manage that. And you can further group them. You can still have employees, but for Texas, you want a different user experience, but for Arizona, you wanted something else. You could have create those groups, add those endpoints. In this case, it will be a Windows PC or Android device or any sort of devices, and then add those users to that and then start creating those specialized policies. One important thing I'll say is that when it comes to biometrics, we take it very, very seriously because we are one of the largest in the US who process millions of transactions of biometrics, every day, every minute, right? So we have very robust consent management templates where we work with your legal team to create these templates where it could be for different laws that are in Illinois or California and states like that, where we have deployed successfully across the board, where they can create these consent documents and gather the consent from an end user when they are about to enroll in our system, and then digitally sign those systems. So everything is consent-based, intent-based. The end user are explicitly giving us permission because we want to protect their privacy, right? So again, when it comes to full large-scale deployment, all of these things, especially with biometrics, will be really important. Obviously, reporting and monitoring and connecting to your SIAM systems like Splunk or even BI system, like I was mentioning, you might already have a Tableau or a Power BI, right? We have our own insights and dashboards, but maybe you want to stick to your systems. We can send those data to those systems, right? But really what comes down to is each users have typically one or two credentials. In my case, I have lots of different ones, but usually you can decide that they can enroll face or an RFID badge with a PIN or NFC tag, right? So or they could have all of these, all of the above, but you can manage all this. There are, depending on the credentials you choose, we have made sure that enrollment is a non-event, where if there is a way we can get the face images from their HR system, we'll sync that. If badge IDs could be coming from a physical access control system automatically, right? So that way, even the tiniest friction that the end user, if we anticipate that, we try to remove that friction by automating a lot of these things, right? To connecting to your source of truth. So for the most part, the employees would show up, tap their badge, and they should be ready to go. And same applies to face, right? But the admins have capability to manage all of those things. We also have a particular role called supervisors, which could be, there's the admins who are like a super admins, but then you might have site level folks whom you want to give some capability to, provide some assistance, like maybe setting their PIN or replacing a lost badge and things like that, right? So those kind of things is also built into our platform, which is role-based access control comes built in. Everything is designed inherently to work as an IAM system, but really ground up, built for frontline workforce, right? So shared passwords, we saw some of the survey results that a lot of you are using it, right? And when we go into a customer, we are not saying, hey, get rid of that, right? Because you can't really get rid of it because that's connected to some software that is running, which needs to run 24/7, right? But what we do is we allow you to configure those at our end, write policies on who should be allowed to use, who are the owners of it, which PCs we need to allow this for. And then from a Windows perspective or Android perspective, we still authenticate them with their shared credential. But as an employee or an IAM admin that is managing it, can have full visibility that, hey, it is this Ali who logged into kiosk user one PC account, right? So that in auditability, which doesn't exist today, you'll have that. And of course, like I mentioned, the endpoint management can be managed centrally, where you can look at it at the global level. We also integrate with your MDM system. So if you're using Intune, you're using SODI, you're using Workspace ONE, we integrate with all of those, so that your existing infrastructure requires minimal change and you can deploy apps, manage apps through your existing infrastructure itself, right? So a lot of these is from the feedback over the years we've learned from our customers on what works best for them, in terms of minimal disruption to their existing day-to-day life. Of course, you can see the transactions, you can see every little event that happened, which can be sent to your existing IAM system or SIAM system, like I mentioned. And the last part I'll touch on here is we've created a product called OLOID Workflow, which is custom built to connect to your on-prem systems, which could be modern on-prem or legacy on-prem systems, where it's a low-code, no-code drag and drop engine, where if you think you have something that is legacy, which cannot be integrated, we've probably built a connector, or we can build a connector for you in a very short amount of time. Again, it goes back to how we can minimize a friction with at least to the end user, where if we can automate provisioning, deprovisioning through connecting to these systems, then we typically go ahead and do that for most of our enterprise customers. So that's the product that our professional services team use when you choose to become a customer, to automate a lot of those things at your end, basically.
All right, thanks, Mohit, Madhu, fantastic. And thanks everybody for joining today. If you got any questions, reach out to these guys. They'll send you something. We recorded this as well if you'd like that. And feel free to reach out to me for any questions as well. But with that, have a great remainder of the day, and thanks for joining.
All right. Thanks, everybody.